I'm Cara Duffy, and this is the Powerful Ladies podcast. And today's episode is a really special edition. It is one of our Powerful Conversation series. We were lucky enough to have 3 members of Waymakers, an amazing organization helping the community in Orange County, California, come and talk to us about what they're doing and why it matters so much. So often, there is a gap of who gets services and help from domestic abuse, human trafficking, people who are having a mental health crisis. Basically, whenever we're experiencing a trauma and a crisis, where do we go in our community? And the answer here is Waymakers, but most people don't know. And there are other Waymakers in counties near you as well, too. I'm so excited to have them share with us today what Waymakers is, how they change the community, and the help they need to keep providing these amazing services. Welcome, everyone, to a Powerful Conversation series by Powerful Ladies. I am very excited to be joined today by these incredible women from Waymakers. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm Cara Duffy. I am a business coach and consultant and founder of Powerful Ladies. And we think it's really important that we are talking about big things in the world and having a roundtable of women who are knowledgeable, educated, or experienced it themselves to tell us what's really going on in the world. And this is one such great example. We were introduced to Emma, and she presented Waymakers to us, and there's such great and amazing work that's happening that I wanted to bring this conversation to everyone. So you guys, 1, know that this organization exists, and 2, know what's really happening on the ground and how you can also become a part of it. So without further ado, I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Let's start with Hether.
Hi, I'm Hether Benjamin. I'm the Chief Program Officer for Youth Development Programs here at Waymakers, and I've been a Waymaker for 19 years. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist working with the youth in the agency.
Love that. And Lita.
Thank you for having us. I'm Lita Mercado. I'm the Chief Program Officer for the Victim Assistance Programs component of Waymakers, and I have been a Waymaker since 2006.
Excellent. And Ronnetta.
Hi, I'm Ronnetta Johnson. I'm so pleased to be with all of you today. And I am the CEO for Waymakers and have been a Waymaker for 28 years.
Let's begin by telling everybody what Waymakers is and what it's doing for the world.
Okay. Well, Waymakers is a nonprofit that was born here in Orange County. It was started as a pilot project out of UCI and has been working on innovations in the areas of working with youth and crime victims for over 50 years now. And so we have basically 5 areas of impact. We shelter children. We have crisis residential programs for youth who are homeless, run away, have threatened or attempted suicide. We are the primary provider for crime victim services in Orange County. And so we work with victims of all types of crime. We do counseling programs for youth that have mental health issues, are involved with the criminal justice system, and we do mediation services and prevention work in the areas of sexual assault, human trafficking, tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs, with focuses on youth, and really work to make positive and lasting change within Orange County.
You mentioned that it was a pilot program. Where did the idea for this come from?
Well, in 1972, there were not services available for juveniles who were at lower levels of getting in trouble with law enforcement. So they were either told not to do that and sent on their way, or they were, if it was bad enough, they might have to go to juvie. And so a professor from UCI and a captain from the Costa Mesa Police Department got together and decided to do an internship program. And so they were doing counseling services for these kids that were getting in trouble. So they were working with the kids and working with the parents. And and they decided to embed them in the law enforcement agencies. And now that seems fairly normal, but at the time it was revolutionary, and really nothing like that had been done. They weren't particularly welcomed to the environment of law enforcement, but within about 6 months, they realized that there were significant changes that were happening. And so that's the roots of Waymakers.
You guys help so many victims across so many areas. You mentioned people who are considering suicide. You mentioned people who are victims of abuse, of human trafficking. How are you guys prioritizing where the community needs help? And are you adding new areas of support on a regular basis?
Well, I think I'll try to take that one on. So first off, I think it's important, and I really appreciate how you acknowledged victim in sort of the broader sense. Often folks hear that term and think of something very specific. So Waymakers is unique in that we really do the full spectrum of care, from primary prevention to tertiary prevention, and then, of course, our intervention, where we're providing services directly to victims of violent crime. And so we don't have to necessarily prioritize because of that. So we have so many comprehensive services that we can meet our community where they're at. So if there are families with young teens with mental health issues that have been unmanaged and are perhaps getting into a little bit of trouble partially because of that, then we have programs in our community that can help fold around the families, that can help fold around the youth and provide those services at that stage. But we also have services if someone is a victim of domestic violence and they're in a different part of their life and this is the need that they have, then there is a different program with a different set of folks that can provide services. And we were discussing this earlier, actually, that while we have a large organization of more than 300 staff, what our staff, the diversity of our staff in terms of the skills level, even just the types of people that we're hiring, we're looking for people who are great fits for each of these communities so that the expertise and the skills meet the needs of that particular community member. So we don't necessarily have to prioritize because of that. But your second question also comes into play, which is then when we're identifying needs or needs are being identified for us, we are trying to stay at the forefront of emerging issues. Our Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force was co-founded by Ronnetta in 2004. Just 4 years after the Trafficking Victims Protection Act came out, but still there were not services for human trafficking victims across the country. We were one of the first task forces to be in development, and we're one of the first 3 to get federal funding for comprehensive services. So we were just in the community working with law enforcement at that time who acknowledged that trafficking was an issue. They believed trafficking may be an issue in their community, but didn't know. And so that's how it started. We got together to discuss this. Is this an issue? Is this something that our community needs? And discovered it was, and we had to educate ourselves. And so that's an example of things that we have built as we've learned the community has these needs. We have new prevention programs for opioid issues. Like that is also an emerging issue that Waymakers has been at the forefront of, acknowledging that prevention is key and awareness is being needed by our community around over-the-counter drugs in this particular way. And so we've built programming, accessing grant and funding to help meet those needs as well.
So the human trafficking part is something that I think people hear and know it's an issue, but really don't know what it looks like in reality. There are... So maybe we just start by defining what is human trafficking and what should you be looking for to know if it's in your community?
Sure. So I'm happy to discuss human trafficking. So yes, it is something that let me define it and then let me bust some myths here. So human trafficking is the deprivation of liberty, either through the utilization of commercial sex or through the utilization of forced or coerced labor. So here in Orange County, the last year alone, we served more than 270 victims of human trafficking. And most of those victims were identified through law enforcement. And the reason why I say that is because what that means is that there are hundreds, if not thousands more victims of human trafficking who are not being identified, because using a law enforcement referral system, obviously you're going to miss folks who haven't had the opportunity to connect with a law enforcement officer. So we here in Orange County, the vast majority of the victims that are being identified are victims of sex trafficking. Most of them, over 80%, are female. And usually somewhere between 25 and 29% are children and teens, so young people under the age of 17. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily the full picture of what human trafficking victimization looks like in Orange County. That's just what's being identified. Labor trafficking is much more difficult to identify because often it's housed within legitimate businesses. And our human trafficking victims, we have been discovering, often don't identify as victims. They're either young people who think that they are making choices of their own volition and don't have a full understanding of the manipulation and coercion that the adults in their lives are employing. Or we have labor trafficking victims from other countries who are in a position that, quite frankly, is better than the war-torn country they were in or the position they were in. And so they find it difficult to understand that what's happening, even though it's terrible, they're just thinking like, this is better than where I was before, and haven't been reaching out for help.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening were just part of a workshop we did with a guest speaker, Lindsay Ayers, from The Employment Lawyer, and really clarifying what all the rules are for employers, especially the state of California, and what is okay and what is not okay. Obviously, the people who are in our community who are in that call are doing everything up to the law. And I'm sure there's a lot of people now who are like, wait, am I labor trafficking someone and I don't know? So what are some examples of labor trafficking? Is it having a nanny from a foreign country that isn't documented, doesn't have paperwork? Is it like, what does that actually look like? Because I know there's extreme cases of, slave labor, which I think is easier for everyone to identify. But I think there's a gray area where you said, like, it looks like it might be legit, but it's not. And here's why.
Yeah, so there is a legal difference between labor exploitation and human trafficking. And now I guess I should say that Waymakers, we provide services to folks, even if it's potential human trafficking. So we could receive a referral, provide services, and perhaps in our assessment with our legal partners, it might not meet the criteria for, the penal code. That doesn't mean that Waymakers can't provide supportive services, make sure folks are receiving referrals. So for service provision, the legal definition is important, but not the qualifying factor. So, but labor exploitation is often what folks are pondering. And those are things in terms of not complying with labor law, not maintaining minimum wage, not paying overtime. Those sorts of things fall into exploitation. Where it crosses the line, especially if you're talking about folks from other countries, is if the employer is holding on to the documents. So we see that where the employees, quote unquote, join the labor force and their employer, for safekeeping, air quotes, hold on to their work visas, but they don't have access to that. We've also had folks where the individuals live where they work, and then as part of their wages, or I should say, their wages get deducted for things like rent and toiletries and water, and the employer is controlling all of that. So that's where then it starts crossing the line and working with individuals who are going through that need real assessments. Like, they'll say, well, I get paid, $100, a day. And then we'll have to, share that's not the minimum wage, but then also, do you get that? And, then we hear, no, I don't get that. It helps pay for my rent and my water. And then I can ask for money if I want to, go out to McDonald's. And so those are moments where we're realizing that it may move into labor trafficking. So it is a little harder, or it's a lot harder to identify, but we experience the same experiences with our sex trafficking victims. And often, honestly, these are just, that sounds minimizing, I should say, these are often within domestic violence experiences. So if folks can think about domestic violence and what we've learned about that over the years on even folks experiencing it, not necessarily identifying that they're a victim of domestic violence. Human trafficking is, we just find that it's a little bit more compounded. And just a little bit of a side note, but to pull back to the comprehensive Waymakers umbrella, is that often the programs that Hether oversees are almost hand in hand with our programs. So we've definitely had folks in her programs that have experienced violence and then are receiving services through someone on the victim assistance programs team. But we also have had people on the victim assistance programs team that we need to refer over to Hether because they're experiencing, potentially they need some wraparound support with their family or have some mental health issues that have helped create the vulnerability that perpetrators are seeing and taking advantage of.
I think when so many people think about Orange County, California, they think of Real Housewives, they think of TV shows like The OC or Laguna Beach, and they're like, these problems must not exist there. And I think that people don't realize that Orange County has the greatest income disparity of any county in the U.S., and that Laguna Beach and Newport Beach are far extremes of what the whole county encompasses. What are some realities statistically about crime and the support that's needed in Orange County and the difference that to support the difference that you guys are making? Like, are things getting better, getting worse? Are we just knowing of more victims now? Like, what are the statistics and what direction are they going in?
Well, as Waymakers, half of the agency supports victims. The other half of the agency counsels individuals and families and helps keep youth in their homes or in a stable environment. But our youth are also victims of adverse childhood experiences that result in them having trauma in their life, unmanaged mental illness, and some of the ways that they've learned to survive happen to be what the rest of the population would describe as unlawful. Things like shoplifting, stealing, reacting a certain way to aggressive encounters where they feel threatened and feel the need to defend themselves. And our job is to help these individuals make their way through crisis and conflict to a place of strength and stability. And so we want to treat our youth as children while we're building resiliency. We're serving youth when they're in their homes. We're increasing family protective factors, and we're connecting youth and families with services to improve their outcomes. Crime has always existed. Are we going to be able to prevent that crime? No. But we are working hand in hand with law enforcement to change the way we handle those youth. Back when we began, it used to be, as Ronnetta said, a youth would get into trouble doing normal, developmentally appropriate things, testing their independence, hanging around with peers and following a group, not having the strength of self or self-esteem to stand up and advocate for themselves and rather following others and making poor decisions. And an officer would come across those youth, and one of two things would happen: either stop it and go home, or arrest, detain, and send to probation or juvenile hall. Eventually, there was nothing in between. Well, when you let the youth go, we don't discover the underlying factors to what issues were happening that may have led to the delinquency. Or by just sending them to probation or juvenile hall, we again aren't addressing the underlying reasons. We're overhandling those youth and punishing instead of using the opportunity as a learning moment. And so that's really the course, even that I've seen in the 19 years that I've been here. We started out as the Hug a Thug type of program was the name we were given. And now law enforcement really sees the value in what we do. And we are changing the direction of how we work with youth in the juvenile justice system.
It sounds like Waymakers is giving that, typical white privilege to juveniles who, like, if you, historically, if you were white and you were caught doing something you weren't supposed to, that was I think you used the words like a juvenile experience, like something attesting the boundaries. You would get caught, you would get talked to, and then you would be let go because you were being sent to your family who would handle it. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like Waymakers is creating a cushion where anyone who's experiencing that in Orange County is getting a similar treatment to be course corrected in an appropriate manner versus permanently classified as a criminal.
You are absolutely correct.
Okay.
We are trying to help the most disadvantaged families that usually have the least amount of resources to get assistance from the community or from private agencies. Those that are underserved, have no insurance. All of our programming is at no cost to these families. And we're not the most well-known agency out there to the general public, but we are to the law enforcement, our district attorneys, our public defenders. And if you have been a victim of a crime, and we're very much a preventative agency, we want to address the underlying issues that's resulting in the symptoms, the behaviors, the resulting impairments, so that that youth can learn coping skills and how to self-regulate themselves rather than rely on their survival skills that may be unlawful.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add sort of your second part of your question is, is crime increasing? So while I can't speak to the statistics countywide in comparison to, California and the country, what I can say is that our numbers in every program almost always are increasing, whether it's prevention, counseling, or intervention. Is that because crime and mental health and other issues are increasing? Probably, maybe. But what, at least for my teams, what is really happening is that folks in the community, our partners that Hether mentioned, are acknowledging that Waymakers exists. There's better access. The advent of technology has created access. We have, social media accounts. So now folks who did not know, especially young folks who did not know that this existed, now know that it existed. So there is more awareness on that we are here and how to access us that increases those numbers. So while my goal is to stop crime and domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. However, I find that the increase in numbers is a measure of success, because what it's saying is that people know that we're here, we're making ourselves more accessible, our partners know that we're here, and people are able to reach out. And yes, that Orange County piece is real in terms of perception. I can say in 2010, when we applied to the federal government for it was a pilot project for providing comprehensive services to all forms of victims of human trafficking. We submitted an application, and I'll be honest to say that it was really more of an exercise of partnership that I wanted to engage in, not that I thought we would have a real chance. And the reason why I didn't think we were going to have a real chance is because this is going to Washington, D.C., and they're going to be receiving, applications from Detroit and from, Chicago, and they're not going to give Orange County the grant just by perception alone. And lo and behold, we were one of the three. Chicago and Dallas were the other two. And what we were able to show is, unfortunately, in terms of human trafficking, being a quote, wealthy county creates the sense of vulnerability. Nearly 92% of our victims of human trafficking are not from Orange County. They are from other counties, other states, other countries. And traffickers are bringing folks into Orange County for the purposes of exploitation, because there is a market here in Orange County for cheap labor, cheap products, and commercial sex with adults and children. And so that is an Orange County issue that needs to be like put on the table, that this perception, first off, false, but also is being leveraged to create vulnerable situations here.
And I think one of the things that's important to understand is that while our clients are predominantly in lower incomes, we serve clients across the board. And the kids that we're dealing with, the victims that we're dealing with, they're not that much different than anybody else. They have special challenges that they're facing, and we're trying to help them work through those challenges. But they're not people that, you're not going to look and say, oh, that's a Waymakers client, or that's a Waymakers client. These are our neighbors and people that are around. I tell a story. I was working with a board committee, and we were in a small restaurant, and at the end, we were standing around just talking and kind of blocking the aisles. And this young woman walked up to us, and I thought we were just in her way. She worked at the restaurant. And when I asked her if we needed to move for her, she said, no. She said, I heard you talking about Waymakers, and I needed you to know that I'm a Waymaker. And I worked with your program for 2 years, and I don't know where I would be without this program. And this is not someone that you would identify as someone who would qualify for our program services. And so I think that's really important for everyone to understand, is that our work crosses all boundaries, and the people that we work with are, have special challenges, but they're no different than any of us in many respects.
Well, and all of us are dealing with big T or little t traumas all the time. Mm-hmm. I think that is such a misconception that like who needs help and who doesn't. And since 2020 in particular, we've seen a lot more people saying that they do need help and asking for, especially in the mental health spaces. But I think across the board, like there's everything that you guys are helping people with. It doesn't matter your education. It doesn't matter your economic situation. It doesn't matter any other demographic measurement that we would normally have. Chances are you're going to need, unfortunately, something from Waymakers at some time. And even I remember being in a course I was taking, and this well-to-do mother was in the course because she was trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that her child, who had gone to college and was on a path to being successful, was now homeless on the streets, mm-hmm. and was doing everything they could to get them to the help they needed, and they were just kind of refusing it due to a combination of a mental health crisis and drug addiction. So you never know who something is going to impact, and at the same time, what we think is common knowledge just so isn't. I do a lot of work with CASA Orange County, and I remember the story of a kid who got his first job, and his advocate was helping him get it. He was doing great. He was getting promoted. And then he asked him, what are you doing with all the money you're making? And he goes, well, they haven't paid me yet. Mm-hmm. He's like, what? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, and because his kid thought you got paid with cash. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, he has a shoebox full of envelopes he's never opened, of checks he's never cashed, because he didn't know what a check was, didn't know how to cash it, didn't know how to set up a bank account. And we make these assumptions that these things that are common are being taught, like it's okay to go to therapy, as just a silly example. and they're really not today. So I think that there's so many more resources that everyone needs, that's part of why I wanted to talk to you guys, because everyone knows someone who who needs help at some point. We know that domestic violence crosses all boundaries. And in fact, I think sometimes it's talked about less when you're not supposed to have those problems at a whole other level.
The work that we do, our families, our individuals are in their most vulnerable position when we come to us. So our first barrier is to overcome the stigmatization that comes with, I'm having a mental health crisis, I'm having a substance abuse issue, financial resource issue, domestic violence, child abuse issue. Most vulnerable, stigmatized, where do you reach out for help? So that's our first barrier, is destigmatizing and getting that word out that the community's here to help you. We're all part of Orange County, and we all experience underlying family factors that contributed to our behavior.
Yeah. Well, and I think also people knowing that if we deal with whatever crisis is happening sooner, it prevents the next crisis from happening as well. How often are you seeing clusters of crises?
Well, I think that happens a lot when we provide a service to an individual. That may be the identified patient per se, but they are not in a vacuum. They have a family, a home, a family, a neighborhood, a community, an employer, and all of those places interact with each other. So we have to address the identified patient in all of those areas. If we don't make a change at home as well, that youth returns to the exact same environments that they came from. And if they're the only one that's changed or been given hope, they're going to be shut down pretty fast because all of the people around them haven't gotten that same opportunity. So we really do in Waymakers wrap around our community. We're coordinating care with all of the team members, all of the service providers, all of the family support people that are in their lives, because it does take a community to help lift up these youth in crisis. And crisis is never going to end. What may be a crisis for me may not be considered a crisis for someone else. It really depends on how much hope you have and what resources you have access to.
And the support team. You know, I think that the loneliness records are off the charts. And when you don't think you have support, it's the whole reason not to ask for it, which is silly. I'm someone who's always amazed when there are public policies that are telling us that we shouldn't help our neighbors. I don't understand this concept. You know, I think we jump ahead so quickly to federal level policies when it's like, what's happening in my house? What's happening on my street? What's happening in my block? Like, there's so much micro things that if our neighbor asks us for something, chances are we're going to give it to them. And I think we forget that sometimes our neighbor is someone we haven't met yet. How are you guys, what are you battling in Orange County to get funds and support and recognition in that space of like making sure people know that this help is needed and that it is most likely someone within your proximity, because we're all 1 degree away if we're living here?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. So I'll just talk about the funding, because the victim assistance programs is in the middle of our own financial crisis. So victim assistance program, sort of et al, is a service that the country has committed to. So federal funds are designated to support victims of violent crime. And those federal funds for the 24-25 fiscal year that start October 1 are going to be reduced by 44.7%, which is basically a 50% cut. And that's not just for Waymakers. That's for every county in every state in this entire union. So I have been working with folks across the state, just so that we can understand how are we going to adjust programming? Do we really have to cut 50% capacity? How do I serve 24,000 clients with half of the people? It's just not possible. So we have been trying to get together to support each other. And I'm learning things like rape crisis centers who are just going to close down. They're just cannot. A 50% cut is just unreasonable. And so we're working with the state to see if we can sneak into the state budget, but we're also sort of ramping up our local asks, connecting with the county and with donors. And so part of the struggle is that folks, funders and people actively participating in philanthropy see victim assistance programs as type of programming that has funding, right? The government supports it. They've got government contracts. So they're focusing in on maybe where there's a greater need, quote unquote. But the issue is that we are beholden then to whoever is in office and what their policies are and how that lays out. And then things just trickle down. Like, things that we're feeling now are from practices and policies from years back, right? So we're just so beholden to that, and their full discretion, right? Where the money needs to go for A, B, and C, but I have community members that need D, E, and F to be supported, but I can't use that money for that. So that's been a struggle in terms of just, again, perspective of where is the need. And now Heather has a different problem where her clients client population often aren't as attractive to funders just by virtue of, she does a great job and she can help explain why obviously you want to help youth and their families and how this impacts community safety and even the economic well-being of your community. But to say like, hey, we need to be able to make sure that we have toiletries and clothing for our unhoused youth that, committed a petty theft and are now, we're supporting through probation. A funder's like, well, I'd really rather, save the turtles or something that's a little bit more palatable, which I do believe people should save the turtles. So that is not a comment on that. It's just, when you talk about prioritizing at the very beginning of this podcast, it's, we're in a position where do you put your priorities? And that can be really challenging to support victims of crime.
And I think that that's true across the agency as far as the funding structure. If you're at a university or, you're in some kind of environment like that, everybody wants to support you because it was part of the best part of their lives and they want it. Well, people who work with Waymakers, typically we are not working with them at the best part of their lives. And so a lot of people, we don't have those natural kinds of donors that are built into the structure because, and that's not to say that we haven't had clients that have donated, we certainly have, but it's not the same kind of system because a lot of times people get through our programs, they're very grateful for our programs, but it's a part of their lives that they then want to set aside and move forward. And we strongly encourage that. We don't want people to be reliant on us for the rest of their lives. We don't want them to feel beholden to us for the rest of their lives. But that creates some challenges in regard to, funding. And so we have to go to the community and we have to make the community really aware. And we were talking earlier about the fact, I think we've been a little bit too modest about what we're doing. So we're trying to get that word out a little bit more because the impact of what we do is enormous and really, it has a huge impact on the community, on generations, on how we're moving things forward. But we just need to be a little less modest about the work that we're doing.
Well, and I think that there's a gap, right? There's a gap of where you get support because we don't have all the social systems from a government perspective in place of like, if you need something, where do you go? Like you guys are the only option often. So first, like making sure people know that you exist is like top of my list because like if you have access to these services, like take advantage of them because they can change everything. But then also remembering that we want this safety net to be there. Like when you talk to people on a one-on-one basis, of course you want to help these people. Of course you want to make this difference. But when there isn't a clear, sustainable funding program for it, it's not going to be able to keep operating in that capacity. So obviously there's opportunities to donate and support financially Waymakers. How else can the community come together to participate and support and make sure that this is a program that has longevity?
I'm sorry. I was just going to talk about volunteering. I'm excited about that. So that's one other way. We do utilize volunteers in a wide variety of ways. That interest can be accessed through our website. So folks went onto our waymakersoc.org website. You can click on how to get involved, and there's information on how to volunteer. So we have volunteers. I can just speak to my program. We have volunteers on our human trafficking team. We have volunteers for our mediation, so you can be a trained and certified mediator. We have volunteers who answer the 24-hour rape crisis hotline and provide crisis support over the phone, and who actually show up at the hospital during forensic exams to help support clients. So there are things that you can do, all the way from hosting a booth at the OC fair to talk about how great Waymakers are, all the way to, holding the hand of someone going through a forensic exam. So that is another way. And I stole some of Ronnetta's thunder, so I'll hand it back to her.
Continuing on the theme of volunteering, we also have volunteers that work with our shelters that will go in and do everything from teaching classes to bringing dinners and so we want to make it accessible for people across the way. We have in our youth development programs, we also have volunteers that come in, teach music, teach art, help people with their career development, teach them how to do financial things. So the volunteer opportunities are, there are a myriad of them. And we also want to work with companies, and a lot of companies have volunteer days. So we're putting together our newest version of, how companies can get involved. And obviously people can donate, they can participate. We have a lot of fundraising events. And so they can do sponsorships, they can purchase tickets and participate in those ways. So the website's a good place to find out about a lot of those things. And we're always happy to get creative with people. If they want to work with us, we'll figure out a way to make that work.
Yeah, we work with local communities because that's where our youth are existing. And so we'll work with local business owners to do an internship program for our youth that often have a difficult time re-entering the job force or starting to get that experience because they've been in and out of home placement, whether in and out of psychiatric hospitalization or potentially in and out of juvenile hall, until they reach one of our programs to stabilize them. And then they have to start building up their resume and portfolio. So working with our local employers to do paid internships where we pay the employer to employ our youth and give them experience for a short period of time. And we're also reaching out into our future generation of staff, where we're going into universities and colleges, educating those students about doing an internship with us to experience how they can give back to their community, get an experience, see what might be a good fit for them, and then eventually become a Waymaker themselves.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to open it up to any of our guests who are here today. What questions do any of you have that you want to ask this group?
I have a question just on the volunteering. Sometimes I live in Santa Monica and I try to pop in to organizations where just to lend a hand. Oftentimes there's a lot of training or maybe you're not really, they want you to be prepared and ready to engage with people. And I totally get that. If someone is limited on time, but still wants to be like, the holding of the hand thing sounds so cool to me. I would love to do that. What's the lead up process? Like, how do you physically get involved?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because that is a difficult balance for us too, that we want volunteers, and then, sometimes making a fit can be hard because the training needs that. So I can answer specifically about my programs, the hand-holding stuff and the mediation. So the Human Trafficking Task Force, the Sexual Assault a volunteer program, and our dispute resolution program all have formal trainings. And they happen typically twice a year, each of those. And so that's step one, is folks would say that they're interested, and then we would respond by saying the next training is, at this time. And so that is difficult. I don't know if your name is Elise. I see that's what it says on there. That's difficult, just sometimes in terms of timing, but we always let people know, like, great, if you want to become a mediator, training is in June. It's hybrid, both virtual and in person. And then we let you know as soon as you complete that, then we interview folks just to make sure that they're a good fit, and then put them to work.
Okay, awesome.
We do also have opportunities. If you keep a look at our website, we do have opportunities that pop up for things, in the shelters and in our different events. And so that's a good way to get a touch point with Waymakers.
Okay. Yeah, but we'll provide the training, so you don't need to run off and do some training on your own. Of course, that's wonderful. But we provide the training, make sure folks have what they need to make it work.
Okay, great. So I'd check the website as a next step to and there's a contact form or whatever, and go from there.
Absolutely. That's correct.
Yeah. And at least everyone who's part of our community, we're going to be sharing some information as well, too.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
And I wanted to point out that one of our colleagues wants to make sure that people know that we have social media links, and, sharing those out, sharing the posts and different things can be really helpful in raising awareness about Waymakers.
Mm-hmm. And what are those handles?
They're at Waymakers OC.org. Well, at Waymakers OC. I'm not the best on social media. So.
Waymakers OC.
Yeah. There you go.
Waymakers OC on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. That's where you can find us.
Perfect. And then for people who are, like, our community is global. So for people who are wondering, is there a Waymakers in their city or a similar group? If someone is in Philadelphia and they reached out to you, do you guys have sister, brother organizations that you know of in other areas?
Well, the first thing I would say is Waymakers is unique as far as the overall. There aren't very many that are exactly like Waymakers. We can certainly, if somebody wanted to reach out to us, we can certainly give them places to connect with that, depending on what their needs are. We can find individuals. The human trafficking, there are task forces throughout the country, so we can make those kinds of connections. There are also national hotlines for both human trafficking and sexual assault that people can connect with, and then they will be connected to services that are in their local community. But we're always happy to help. And if people want to reach out to us, we will do our best to get them connected.
Well, I'm just so honored that you guys saw a correlation between what Powerful Ladies is creating and how we could partner to amplify the voices of Waymakers and what you're doing. We are always looking for ways to volunteer and support our community and add to the list of organizations that we're supporting. Just thank you so much for the work that you are doing. Thank you for taking time today to share about it. Anyone who owns a business knows that you can't do anything alone. Anyone who runs a family knows you can't do anything alone. And part of what I love about running this podcast and the Powerful Ladies as an organization is that I keep getting to meet incredible women like you guys who I can sleep better at night knowing that you're doing your job, because I can't manage the entire save the world to-do list by myself. There's not enough hours in the day or any other individual resources. So truly, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It is so appreciated. And I hope you guys realize how grateful the community is for you and the difference that you're making. I think everyone would much rather change a life than have it go any other way, but giving people hope and possibility. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. We're very excited to have this episode go out. Thank you everyone who came today as a guest to listen and participate. But truly, just thank you.
Well, thank you. We really appreciated the opportunity to speak with you and appreciate your support.
We're so happy to be part of the Powerful Ladies group. Because
my daughter is very proud.
As you should be. All the links to connect with Waymakers, Ronnetta, Hether, and Lita are in our show notes at thepowerfulladies.com. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating and review. Join us on Instagram at Powerful Ladies, and you can connect directly with me at karaduffy.com or on Instagram at Kara_Duffy. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, I hope you're taking on being powerful in your life. Go be awesome and up to something you love.